Hi, Natasha. Thank you for being with us. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
First of all, thank you for having me on this event celebrating women. It's so good for championing change. My name's Natasha. I am Malaysian and I work in the international news industry. I present a show called Newsfeed, which looks at social media and tech trends, basically talking about what's big on social media and why these stories matter. I have been in international news for the past 6 years of my career, and that's where we're at.
And you've been in Turkey for 6 years now after being a reporter in Malaysia. And
Mhm.
why did you go for that change, that move all the way to Turkey from here?
Uh, I have before Turkey, I was in China. So it was just a natural progression of wanting to have a bigger voice. And I'm not, just having that platform from local news to international news. And I do feel like I have so much praise for local journalists as well. But, I just was up for a new challenge.
Yeah. And the conflict in Gaza, that's what we want to narrow down into now and focus on. A lot of Western media, especially, they will harp on the date of October 7th as the start of the conflict in Gaza, but it has happening for years now. And I think as a reporter, you know that very well. But tell us, how has the experience been covering the conflict in Gaza? It's not just your everyday news, but it's something that has been prolonging and causing human suffering on such a massive scale. How has it really been like, Natasha?
It has been mentally exhausting, whether you are in Gaza or outside of Gaza. And just from October the 7th, I work at TRT World, and we are an international news channel with bases all over the world. And from the minute the news broke, we went on rolling news. We were covering it nonstop. All of us were here in the office. I'm in the office right now, and it was just nonstop. The visuals that we were seeing, and we had our reporters on the ground. We have who is still there, by the way, till this day. Our main correspondent out of Gaza, his name is Nizar Sadawi. He has been working at this point 152 days nonstop, without break, under Israeli bombardment, with just working in the most tireless conditions in cold weather. You know, it's just crazy. Like just yesterday, I message him every couple of days to just be like, we're rooting for you, we're thinking of you, we appreciate everything that you do, because I can't even imagine what it's like right now to be there. But you know, it's the bravery of the people of Gaza right now. At any point in time, Nizar could try to leave the country. Other reporters like him, Hind Kadari, other women reporters there as well, could be trying to leave the country. But no, they're there, they're doing their duty, they're telling their story. They have to tell the story of their people.
It's the bravery and the courage of the people in Gaza that I think you feel responsible as journalists, as responsible journalists, to tell the world, to show the world what's really happening on the ground. And we saw a snippet of your interview with photojournalist Motaz Azaiza. He's been hailed as a hero, risking his life, like Nizar, your colleague, to deliver coverage on what's really happening in Gaza, giving firsthand accounts on the atrocities that are occurring. Can you share with us a little bit about that session? What were the challenges that Motaz Azaiza told you about that he is currently facing, and what does he foresee in the near future happening?
Well, I first off, the interview was last week on Wednesday, and let me just say this: we went into the day with a rundown set and not knowing that we were going to have the opportunity to interview him. So I came into the office and there was an email saying Murtaza Zaiza is going to be in the office today. But the email that came from the interviews desk came with a huge disclaimer. It said, he's coming to the office, but remember, guys, he is a genocide survivor. He is heavily traumatized. Do not try to talk to him. If you're a fan, if don't try to talk to him, don't crowd him, don't try to take photos with him. So even him coming to the office, we were told by the team that was handling this interview, he's a genocide survivor. This is serious. He's not a celebrity. Like, this is not a party. So when it was finally confirmed that my show Newsfeed was going to be able to interview him, there were only 2 shows on TRT World that day: Normal News, which was rolling news coverage interviewing him, and my show, because Newsfeed has been covering Murtaza Zaiza and these reporters on the ground since day one. We have been following him from when he had 25,000 followers on Instagram until now, when he has more than 20 million followers collectively across the board. Interviewing him was very, very, very heartbreaking. He clearly was not comfortable and pretty much said that he is suffering from PTSD and survivor's guilt. And honestly, he said he doesn't want to be here doing the media rounds. He doesn't want to be traveling. But he has to do it because he feels a duty to speak up, speak out against the atrocities and the genocide being committed in Gaza today. And if he doesn't do that, then he's not doing his duty for his people, for his country.
And for Motaz, for someone who is reporting straight from Gaza, when you were interviewing him, what are his hopes? Is he even hopeful? Well, what does he see happening? And is there that glimmer of hope that exists for the people of Gaza? Is it there? Do you see it in his eyes?
One thing he did say, and this stuck out to me, was that he said that you can have a ceasefire, you can try to rebuild Gaza, which is, a large swathes of it is decimated at this point. But what you can't bring back is the people. The official figures say that there are tens of thousands of people who are missing at this point in time. It's believed they're buried under the rubble in Gaza right now. I can't even imagine the conditions there. They are starving, and there are obviously bodies decomposing under the rubble, missing people, missing. So you can try to rebuild, you can try to do all of these things, you can have a ceasefire, but it's not going to bring back the tens of thousands of people who have lost their lives in the past 5 months. So that's what stood out to me, is something what he said, which is that there is hope, but there have been so many lives lost and people dying every day. And we're now reaching a point where it's no longer bombardment and gunfire that's killing people, it's malnutrition. It's a secondary part of the crisis at this point. Israel is starving these people.
Yes, and those numbers that we see glaring on our TV screens, the number of deaths, the number of those who are injured and wounded, those are not just numbers, those are human beings, men, women, and children together. Natasha, as a news reporter, we know that there's a responsibility of being neutral, impartial, and so on. How do you ensure balanced and accurate reporting amidst the complexities of the situation? For instance, when there's an internet blackout, what do you do?
Well, a lot of the correspondents in Gaza actually have eSIMs or are connected to lines that are close to the Israeli border. So what I actually have been doing is messaging our correspondents that we have. Like I mentioned earlier, Nizar, I message him constantly being like, what is the internet situation today? Are you okay? This blackout that we're talking about, how long has it been? There was a very, very long internet blackout, one of the longest in Gaza's history, a couple of weeks ago. So constantly throughout that, I was messaging him and trying to get the real situation of facts on the ground. What's going on?
And what are the challenges do journalists face, including Nizar, of course, in covering this conflict, particularly when you want to get and access accurate information? Who are the sources on ground? Because things are haywire there in Gaza. So how do they put the pieces together and finally put it in a news reporting for the world to see?
Again, it's fact checking with our correspondents on the ground. I know there are internet connectivity issues, but we try to get around that. But also a big thing nowadays is the internet. One of the reasons why this conflict is different than other conflicts that we've been seeing in the 90s and 80s is that we are seeing the atrocities happen in real time as they happen. There's no hiding these atrocities anymore. Anyone with a phone can put out what they're seeing, and you can try to fact check this yourself. And then there are also OSINT fact checkers, open source intelligence fact checkers, being able to be like, did this really happen? What you know, so even, you know, in the past week, there was the flower massacre, and we were able to determine that did happen, and so many sources on the ground. We had videos. There's so many ways that you can actually determine that that is actually what happened on the ground, even with connectivity issues.
The power of social media is immense. I think it's also the responsibility of the receiver. The onus is on the reader or the viewer to also analyze and make sure the facts are correct, and to check different sources as to what is the truth. Now, the reporting of human suffering and casualties resulting from this conflict in Gaza, there must be an emotional toll. We are all human beings. How do you maintain professionalism when you're witnessing such devastation, Natasha?
I think you need to take yourself out of the story when, you know, you are working. And I know it's very, very hard because, like you said earlier, what we're looking at, these are people. This could be somebody you know. This could be your family member. This is someone's dad. This is someone's wife, you know. So for that moment, you do need to take yourself out of the story and try to, okay, how do I move forward with this? But at the same time, I do feel like there is a heavy weight after work where you do have to decompress a bit and try to, I guess, mentally come to terms with what you're seeing. And if you don't do that, then it's gonna come and hit you later on. But what I have to say is whatever struggles we feel in the newsroom, it is not as bad as whatever is actually happening on the ground there in Gaza. And for example, with Motaz, you could really see it. He left last month, 2 months ago, from Gaza, and you still see the lingering effects of war on him, the things he's seen, the people he's seen killed, more than 18 family members he lost. And that's just not something you can pretend didn't happen.
You had an opportunity to interview scholar and poet Professor Refat Al-Arer, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike about 1 month after you interviewed him for your show, a news feed. Share with us the moment when you found out about his death.
That was actually really, really difficult. And you know, there's something that's been going around on social media with talking about the Gaza war and what people, it's this hashtag called "what broke me," and it's what image, what story actually broke you, you know, when it just caused you to break down because of what was happening on the ground in Gaza. And I do feel like that saying fits very well with the moment I found out that Rafat had been killed. I was on my way to work and I checked my messages, and there was a message from my dad, and it was a tweet that basically said Rafat had been killed overnight in an airstrike. I basically was crying in the car on the way to work. I was devastated that he had been killed. And in the weeks before that, I had talks with my team, and we were like, we should have Rafat on again. He was so insightful the day we had him, and it just, obviously that never happened. It just kind of, it was talks about it happening again, but obviously, you know, he was killed. The other thing is the day that we actually did interview him, we had booked the interview with him. And then that morning of the interview, I was a little worried about him because I had checked on Twitter, and his last tweet said that there had been an airstrike near his house. And then there was nothing. And we were so worried. And then we couldn't reach him. Our interview producers couldn't reach him that morning. 10 minutes before the interview, we were like, we don't know if this interview is happening. We don't know if this man is even alive. Because there were no tweets from him, nothing, no contact. Finally, 10 minutes before our interview was scheduled with him, he appeared online, and it turns out his house was bombed overnight. So he had fled to somewhere else with his family, but his house was gone in ruins. His neighbors were killed. He managed to flee with his family safely. And then he basically had gone to fled somewhere else, left his family behind, and come to a hospital to get internet to be able to do the interview with us. So even losing his home, losing neighbors in his apartment building, and he was still, I'm coming to do this interview with you guys because I need to tell people what's happening, the atrocities that are happening. So Rafat's loss was massive. But whatever it is, I do believe his voice and his poetry, his words, his blog stories, his interviews, his words will live on.
Exactly. Yeah. Natasha, at the height of the escalation, at the height of the conflict escalation in Gaza, I think people were talking about it every day on their social media, talking about it with friends and family. And after months have gone by till today, perhaps some of us may have forgotten a little bit about what's happening in Gaza. The conflict is still ongoing. People are still suffering and left homeless. People are still getting bombarded with bombs and atrocities executed there. What do you hope viewers take away from your reporting? And what role do you believe the media should play in helping shape public opinion and also influencing policy decisions in relation to this conflict?
Well, the media obviously has a huge role to play in shaping the narrative. And what we've been seeing in the past decade or so is a shift in this narrative, because in the 80s and 90s, it was very much a Western viewpoint on what was happening in the Middle East. What we're seeing now is more accountability, more channels like Al Jazeera, TRT World, where I work, for example, basically countering that Western narrative and saying, hey, that's not what's happening. This maybe isn't a terror group. What these people are doing are fighting for their lives. And that's the big role that media has to play at the moment, is in educating people, especially in the West. In North America, if people are told their whole lives that Arabs are bad and the Israelis are amazing and know what they're doing, then it is our role in the media to be able to tell people, actually, this is not the whole story. Let's give you a bigger, more context into what the background in the story actually is and what is actually happening on the ground right now. So you're not only seeing things from the perspective of the IDF, which is the Israeli army, but what you're seeing is, a grassroots effort to actually counter that narrative. And I do feel like as a person in the media, you do have a responsibility to not only try to tell that story, but be as unbiased as possible while doing it.
So do you think there is a change, especially from Western media in particular, in the narratives that they play out? Has it been a little bit more accurate than it used to, not be?
I'm saying I do see a shift, but what I'm also seeing is that Western media is being called out online for using a certain slant or using certain words. For example, the BBC being called out online for using the word dead instead of killed when referring to Palestinians being killed. And so we are seeing a bit more accountability, just because there are people online calling these big companies out and holding them to account.
And Natasha, I think a lot of us feel helpless. We feel like we don't have a voice or we don't have access to do anything to help ease the pain of the people in Gaza who have to go through this conflict. But what is your advice, or what would you like to share to those who are feeling this way on what they can do? What part can they play, even though they feel helpless? And I think a lot of them, now we're celebrating International Women's Day, and I think a lot of our viewers are in awe seeing a woman journalist, you, Natasha, being the voice on an international platform. What do you have to say on how they can play their part?
I think that no matter who you are in the world, you need to use your voice in terms of speaking out against the conflict in Gaza right now. So whatever it is, keep using your voice, keep posting those stories, keep getting the story out there. Don't let it die down, because the minute it dies down, then, you know, Israel can keep doing what it's doing with impunity. So keep using your voice, because the politicians at some point will have to listen. And it is a pressure campaign on all fronts. It's a slow pressure campaign, and we want to, you know, stop it. We want to stop the killing and the atrocities being carried out in Gaza. Another way you could also help is by donating to funds, relief efforts across the region. And also do check out GoFundMe, because there are campaigns trying to get people out of Gaza as well. People in the US, for example, trying to get their family members out of Gaza. And, you know, it costs a large amount of money to get people out right now. So whatever it is, no matter how, use your voice. If you have some spare change, do donate it to relief efforts.
Thank you very much, Natasha, for being with us and agreeing to be interviewed. We want to say to you to please stay safe from wherever you are. We look forward to more news reporting from you on the conflict in Gaza. Thank you for your service, and do just keep going, stay strong. To you and your colleagues at TRT. Thank you again, Natasha.
Thank you so much for having me.